Hello, my name is Nolan Miller. Today's date is November 4th, 2009. I'm interviewing William T. Wrege at Ball State University about his experiences in the military during the Vietnam War. Let's start off from the beginning, a little of your background. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in New Albany, Indiana, and raised in that area. It's down by Louisville, Kentucky.
What was life like growing up there through your childhood and high school and such?
It was very middle America, grounded in local school, basketball, church, those kinds of things. I think culturally, it was very Southern. That just kind of comes to mind. As a contrast to today, it was a segregated community, and I went to a segregated high school.
What made you, were you volunteer or were you drafted for your service?
I was a forced volunteer. I went to college in 1964 in the fall, and the war was heating up, and I thought it was going to get worse before it got better. So at that time, ROTC was mandatory for male students my freshman year, and then in my sophomore year, they took the mandatory provision off. But I stayed in for that reason. I thought the war was going to heat up, and you just choose your better options. So I thought being an officer in the Air Force was going to be preferable to other options. So I stayed in, and then sure enough, it did get very much worse, the war.
So why did you pick the Air Force?
We had Air Force and Army, ROTC, and I suppose I thought the Air Force seemed like a more gentlemanly route. Also, my brother-in-law had gone to the Air Force Academy, and he was in the Air Force at that time after having been at the Air Force Academy.
Do you have any other family that had served in Vietnam or previous wars that influenced you to volunteer?
No, my family has been fairly war-free. My father wasn't in World War II, and my grandfather wasn't in World War I. I had an uncle, some uncles who were in World War II.
How did your family feel about your volunteering?
They were fine with it. I can't remember a positive or negative word about it. It just started, well, this is life, and this is what we're going to do next.
How did you feel about the war up until that point? Were you for it, against it?
I guess I was very ambivalent. I knew I didn't want to be part of it. I felt a sense of duty. I never thought of going off to Canada or anything like that. But I was not an athletic kind of a person. So a lot of those maybe kinds of appeals, like male kind of appeals, they weren't there for me. As far as public policy with the war, it seemed like, oh goodness, I guess we just have to do this, to oppose the communist bloc. Now this is the next step in the Cold War, and we got to take this. And I remember seeing Hubert Humphrey, vice president at the time, in a speech. I went to Indiana University for my undergraduate degree, and he was a powerful speech maker. I didn't like him, but and he talked about Ho Chi Minh, the meeting, and in the communist meeting in Hanoi, and whenever it was, and it was communist plot, and we had to defend our South Vietnamese ally, and I think that was pretty much justification for the war, and of course just opposing the communist bloc.
How did your town feel about the war? Were there a lot of anti-war protests, or was the town pretty supportive?
Oh no, yeah,
pretty
it was
supportive.
middle America. There wasn't a college around. I mean, there were small colleges, but no, there was no anti-war sentiment.
Where did you have your training at?
I went to it's called a field training unit during an 8-week, I think it was 8 weeks, in the summer. It was at Little Rock Air Force Base in Little Rock, Arkansas. So that was the basic training. Now, of course, the ROTC, that was a 4-year program, and I came out of that as a second lieutenant.
And what was your training? What was that like for you? Did you enjoy it? Was it rough?
Again, I mean, it was kind of an athletic thing. No, I didn't like it. I actually kind of liked the marching. I had done some of that kind of thing before, and I mean, today I could march you down the hall if you'd like for me to. But the other parts of it, the running and this and the that, and I didn't care for that. And of course, it was a very structured program. You got up at a certain time, you made your bed, you went to breakfast, and then you had this kind of activity and that. And so it was just something to get through. It's kind of like finals week that went on too long. So,
what specific areas did you train in for your preparation?
Well, I guess I don't know what kind of area of preparation that was relevant to me, but after I got into the Air Force, I was at a supply school. I was a supply officer, so I had 8 or 9 week training program at Lowry Air Force Base in Denver, Colorado for that training, and that was pretty enjoyable.
Do you have any specific memories of events that happened during training you remember that had an impact on
you? Well, let's see. The first, I guess, the field training unit, the little more rugged. We went out on a 2-day survival, and we had rations that I can't remember when they were packed, but it was, say, 10 years before. And then otherwise, if we were going to eat, we had to catch something, rabbits or whatever. And so we basically didn't catch, we didn't eat too well. And I was pretty hungry after the couple of days. That was, kind of not pleasant. I remember one guy, his name was Bullock. I think I remember his name because of this. He was kind of a weird person. And I hope he doesn't get this tape. He came marching into, or running into the camp area one day, had found a bird, like a baby bird, and thought we were going to eat this thing, and said, "Oh, look here, I have found some baby bird meat." And it was just such a remarkable thing to say, and assessment that, I remembered it. So I can't think of any other, we have to run, and things like that. But I don't, no specific episodes of any great note.
Then you were stationed at Eielson Air Force Base?
Eielson, yes.
Eielson Air Force Base in Alaska. How did you become stationed there? Was it randomized, or did you pick it somehow?
That Major Kaiser, when I was in ROTC, he said to us when we filled out our location preferences, if you don't have any place you want to go in particular, then just volunteer worldwide. And you got 4 selections. So I know I chose, one of my 4 selections was Bunker Hill Air Force Base, which is now Grissom Air Force Base in Indiana, because it was in Indiana. And then I think I selected at least one base in California, because I thought it'd be kind of cool to go to California. And I can't remember what the third choice was. It could have been a place in Texas or another place in California. But then the 4th one, I thought, geez, I really don't know where I want to go, so I'll just volunteer worldwide. And I did, and they took me seriously.
Was that?
And then sent me to Alaska. And I can remember getting those orders and sitting on in this chair at my parents' house and opening those up with great anticipation and seeing Eielson Air Force Base. Had no idea where it was, and it was an oh my God moment. And then I started to look up about it and to see, and then they sent information like a brochure and whatnot that told something about it. And I thought, man, this is going to be something.
So were you looking for the adventure of going up there, or were you kind of dreading it?
I think I more dreaded it, but I mean, certainly there was adventure about it.
What were your daily duties or routines at the base?
Well, I guess one thing is upon leaving my bachelor officer's quarters, the BOQ, where out the back I could have started to walk and gone thousands of miles and not seen another human being. And I mean literally out the back door for that. And in the winter, I'd unplug your car has an engine block heater, and then drive to work, which wasn't very far. And then I had a staff of 4 or 5 people. There was a senior master sergeant who knew everything, and so he was pretty much really in control there and kept the thing going. And that was really more of a training situation for me too, just getting attuned to the Air Force and learning something about the operation. So we had to secure parts and material for the communication function, which include the navigational aids, the tower, a telephone lines to the city. There was a crypto, they had teletypewriters, and it was, I guess they just called that the crypto unit. So, they had to have parts to fix their teletype machines and whatnot. So just all those kinds of supplies was my function.
So where was the base located? Was it by a city, or was it kind of?
It was 25 miles from Fairbanks and 1 mile from Hell, I think. And that's a long 25 miles. I mean, if you want to go down there in the winter and it's 30 below or 40 below, I mean, that's potentially a life-threatening drive. And Fairbanks wasn't very much, 20,000 people maybe, and they did have an escalator, which they regarded as a remarkable thing.
So did the locals in Fairbanks feel the military presence there? Were they
Oh yeah. Yeah, there was a big Army base, and then there was the Air Force base, and so many people, probably residents of Fairbanks, had been in the military and retired there. So I mean, a lot of people really liked it.
Well, even though you were still in the country, did it feel like another world since it was so far away from everything?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I was there. Actually, I arrived, say, right around November 4th in 1968. And was totally dismayed that there was no live television. Therefore, I was not going to be able. I arrived the end of October, and and the election. The 68 election was right around the 4th. It may have been on November 4th, I don't know. But anyway, I found out just immediately I was not going to be able to watch live election returns, and was just badly affected by that. Wait, ask the question again.
Did you feel like it was another world since?
Oh, yeah. And then, I mean, there's a perfect example. The being able to go out my back door and go, I mean, literally thousands of miles without seeing another person. The moonscape and the weather, and just that lack of communication. And of course, you didn't pick up the telephone and call anybody. It'd be horribly expensive to do that. I mean, I did talk on holidays with family, but you couldn't talk on a normal basis or often basis.
So did you contact your friends and family through letters mostly?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel like that it could be the front line of the Cold War since Russia was so close? Was there ever a fear from attack? Maybe that Russia would get involved?
Oh, no more than everyday life. Say back in the States. I mean, all during that period. I mean, it was always the case that in 15 minutes we'd be fried, and definitely Eielson would have been a primary target, just with its proximity to
like
Russia
and Pearl Harbor.
And yeah, I mean they would have taken that base out just immediately. So.
What was we want to talk a little bit about the weather there during your time. Can you explain? Well, you know it was extremely cold. Do you have any stories along lines?
Yes. The feeling of deprivation and loneliness, and you mentioned the isolation of being in another world. I mean definitely that. When it was so cold, like driving to downtown, to go on a Saturday or Friday night or something, that was really pretty, well, sometimes kind of a scary decision. We're going to do that. When like I said, I arrived late October in '68, and in January of '69, the average temperature for the month was 44 below zero. And I just remember day in and day out waking up, of course in the dark, and hearing the radio announcer saying something like, the high today in Fairbanks will be minus 50 degrees, the low minus 55. Right now it's minus 52 degrees in downtown Fairbanks. And of course you go into the music and whatnot. And so, but it was horrendous. And one of the bad things about it, maybe more than just the absolute cold, was there was ice fog that would form at minus 30, just all the moisture in the air freezes, and creates this terrible fog. And, when this started, I really didn't know my way around very well. And so getting places, and of course, as cars would drive, it just put more moisture in the air. There was no breeze, so it didn't blow away, so it just got cloudier and cloudier and cloudier. So it was very difficult to get around and just go about day-to-day business. And so.
Did that have an overall effect to your morale?
Oh, it's horrible. Yes, it made me very depressed. And I thought, let's see, last year at this time I was on a college campus of 27,000 contemporaries, and now I'm in this place. And it was, it was devastating.
You mentioned driving into Fairbanks in the cold. Was that something you did on your free time that you had to hang out in town there?
Yes. We would often on Saturday go down to Fairbanks and go shopping. I don't know what we were going to buy. Go out to eat, go to bars and things like that.
Did you have a lot of free time then on the weekends and such?
Oh, yeah, on the weekends. It was just pretty much a 40-hour-a-week job.
What was the general mood of the people at the base in regards to Vietnam?
People didn't talk about it so much. I think I'd say generally supportive. I don't remember people saying, I wish we were out of that stupid war, or anything like that. I think they were loyal to the cause, you might say. So.
Did you often worry about being deployed into Vietnam?
Well, I guess I certainly thought I'd probably end up going over there. And my best friend at the time from college, he was in the Army, and he did go to Vietnam. And from Eielson, I got assigned. Well, I did. That was an 18-month tour. So I thought, okay, where are you going to go next? Well, I just didn't know, and I put in a request. I requested Washington, D.C., and I got that. I went to Bolling Air Force Base. One thing I did not do in Washington, D.C. that I might have done, because I had the example of other people buying houses, and I don't know, I may have bought a house, but I thought, you could get assigned to Vietnam just tomorrow, and then there you've got this house, and you don't want that. So I never bought a house. As it turns out, I just stayed in D.C. the rest of my time, which is 70 to 73.
How did you deal with that thoughts of being shipped over there, possibly, while you're at the base?
I guess I'd say I didn't deal with them. I don't know. Don't know what I wasn't, let's say, very attuned to my emotions. So I just would try to ignore it.
Did you ever hear stories about what was happening from Vietnam from people that you contacted with at the base?
Not too much. You might think, well, being in the military, you'd know people who got killed. But, well, first I was in the Air Force. I'm not sure how many people from the Air Force got killed. And then second, people who I knew from, who had been in Vietnam, they were coming back from Vietnam, typically. And so that would kind of mitigate being close to, let's say, people who got killed. So you requested to Bolling Air Force Base from Eielson after your tour. Uh-huh.
What duties did you have there at that base? Were they basically the same?
A bit different. I was a supply officer again, but at Eielson I was a part of a tenant unit, and so we dealt with base supply. We ordered product or material from base supply, and then base supply would give us the goods. When I was at Bolling, I was part of base supply. I was the equipment management officer. And so, we were the host, and so the various functions, maintenance functions in particular, would order supplies from us, and we would deliver those. We had at least a dozen generals on the base, including the Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force. So a whole lot of it was kind of tending to them. And there was a set of china that certain generals got. It was called representational china. And so let's say that the commander in Europe, well, of course, they would have social duties, so they would get this. They would be entitled to get this china. And so if they ordered it, we would send it. We would get orders for it from lesser generals, and we would have to write back and say, sorry, you don't get that. You're not on the list. And I remember, the first time we did that, again, I had this senior master sergeant, and he kind of helped me along with this. But I thought, are we really going to tell this guy he didn't get this china? Well, yeah, right. I mean, not authorized. So,
with an increased number of officers there since the location and stuff, was the duty more strict that you had to follow compared to Eielson?
No. I don't know that I would call any of it really that strict. I mean, it was a military organization, and when we had a staff meeting, we would gather, and then the commander would walk in the room, and everybody stood up, and we would, have a staff meeting with yes or no sir, and lieutenant and colonel, and that kind of a thing. So there was a structure to it that certainly doesn't occur in a faculty meeting, but I wouldn't say it was really strict.
How was life different there from Eielson? It's an extreme, like two extremes on things.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I still didn't want to be in the military, and I had a great deal of misery about that. It just kind of depressed me. I just had personal emotional issues that were a bother as well. So, I wasn't exactly the happy camper. Having those kinds of stresses, and then I'm in some situation I don't want to be in. But it was a lot. I guess it was a lot more fun, and I guess had greater camaraderie with some of my fellow junior officers there. And then there was just Washington, D.C. I mean, gosh, just lots going on there. So I enjoyed that a great deal. And this friend that I mentioned, this best friend, he got back from Vietnam, and then actually before he went, he would come visit. He was stationed at Fort Knox, and he and a buddy would come out and visit. And that was always a lot of fun, kind of memorable occasions. And just other times were a lot of fun.
Was the morale different there?
I'm not sure I'd say so. I know there was I can't remember the name of this group. There was this rabble-rouser lieutenant who was opposed to the war, and by this time now, their opposition to the war is growing quite dramatically, just in general. And so this fellow was an organizer, like Young Officers Against the War. Well, wait a minute, you're in the military, dude, and this is not indicated. That was, and he tried to recruit me to be in the group. In fact, I went to, I'm pretty sure that this is, that these are connected, this group, and they had a gathering in D.C., and had Senator Eugene McCarthy, who was anti-war, come speak. And so he, gave a speech about it. And I went up to him afterwards and asked a question. I don't know what it was. But I apparently had quite a bit of anxiety about my question. And I think more, I don't think so much that I was going to go to Vietnam, but just like this really, this is miserable. I mean, the way the country is going, and with this war. And he essentially said, you can't take these things too seriously. You gotta have boundaries about these things. I just think he saw the anxiety in me, and I don't know, tried to comfort me, whatever. But so I don't know.
Since the base was located in Washington, did you ever have to, or did you have more experience with Vietnam War protesters?
Yes. Actually, it was, in that regard, it was after the service, I remember in particular. It was Inauguration Day, 73, and I had participated in the committee to re-elect the president, Nixon. And I was out of the service then, and then I was getting an MBA at George Washington University. And so a friend of mine, where I had gotten tickets to this and that because I'd been on this committee, like the inaugural parade. So a friend of mine and I went down to the inaugural parade, had terrific seats, by the way, and then we left there, and we got bound on two sides. We were, in the middle of, say, a north-south street, and on the a perpendicular streets, both north and south, there were these protests going on. And we were like, we just kind of want to be out of here, And I remember that. But otherwise, not so much. I mean, I never went down to the mall and saw the protester.
During that time, the Pentagon Papers were released. Did you notice did that have an effect on the troops stationed?
Oh, I don't think so. That was, let's see, can't remember the particulars of that. I remember that fellow who did the releasing of them, and it was a breaking of secrets, but I don't remember the text of them. And I don't think that, as far as I know, didn't have an effect on morale.
Did you ever run into any famous people during your service there?
Oh, yeah. I was escort officer for Barry Goldwater, and he was my hero. I mean, to this day, I say I am a conservative Republican, but I'm not a conservative Republican of today. I'm a Barry Goldwater conservative Republican, and there is an unbelievable difference. I mean, these people bear no relationship to him, or barely one. And he came over for a dining in, it was called, a formal dinner at the Officers Club at Bowling. And the fellow who was president of the junior officer group asked me to be, he knew I was a real Barry Goldwater fan, so he asked me to be the escort for him. And that, of course, was quite, I don't know, a thrill. I was also in a program. I was what you call an escort or a host for a high school student group. It was William Randolph Hearst Student Senate Program, I think it was called, and they brought 2 high school students from every state to Washington, and then they went around and they saw everybody, and they would see a speaker like a senator at breakfast, go to the Supreme Court and see a Supreme Court justice, have some senator at noon, or representative, maybe go to, say, the Justice Department and see, I remember saw John Mitchell in the afternoon, then have a dinner and I know we saw Walter Mondale, for a dinner speech. And this was like every day, and it went on, I don't know, 3 or 4 days. And so one day I had lunch with 44 senators. So, I mean, it was an extraordinary event. And then other times, well, at that inaugural time, I was out of the service. I saw Nixon and actually stood next to Martha Mitchell, wife of the Attorney General John Mitchell, and she was kind of a Washington character. I don't know if you probably haven't heard of her, but she was quite the character, and would call up in the middle of the night to newspaper people with a rattle trap on, and got some notoriety that the administration certainly didn't want. But just a lot of people.
What were your reasons for leaving service?
Fundamentally, it was not for me. Now, I said it wasn't that difficult or rigorous, but it was probably more than I wanted. And I ended up being a college professor, so that probably description enough there as to what I eventually did with my life versus what I was in. I think I probably had, in other ways, more adventure about me. They had to be in a very kind of a lockstep situation in the military. So, those kinds of reasons.
Since you weren't stationed out of the country, did you have a pretty easy transition back to normal life after you exited service?
I'd say so, yes.
What kind of reception did you receive from people after your service?
Oh, welcoming. I don't know, I guess you'd say approval. I didn't encounter any Jane Fonda kind of protests, like, why did you do that?
What was your view of the war after you left service? It's kind of winding down by that point.
I was very glad, of course, that it wound down, and I guess I just, you might say, I supported the winding down. It was like, let's get out of here. So it's, so dramatically affected my view of the current war. I mean, just those lasting effect. And I think, kind of like you might look at the Civil War, we never got into any really serious war for how many years after? 80 years after that. And I think probably just the lasting effects is such a horrible thing. And then, so the Americans, they didn't want to get into one. So, and I feel that way about, I mean, that was been my lasting effect of the Vietnam War.
What did you do after your service from then on?
Well, I finished my MBA. Actually, I started it while I was in the service at George Washington, and I'd take a night class, kind of dabble around really, and then after I was out, I just continued that, finished that, and then I got a job in public accounting in Indianapolis, and had jobs, and really couldn't settle down until I had an opportunity to teach, and I really liked that. So then I got a PhD and have taught since then.
Was that one of your goals to teach? Did you ever think you'd become a teacher when you were younger?
No, never thought of that. It was just one of those, it happened. It happened one night, and I liked it. And I had not liked anything about practicing accounting. What a horrible way to make a living. It's not really. A lot of people like it a lot. But for me, it was. And but the teaching aspect of it, I liked quite a bit.
Did your military experience help you in the field of teaching?
No.
Did you take any lessons from your service?
Yes, quite a few. Now, to categorize though and say out loud, I don't know. I guess just the fact of being in a difficult situation that I really didn't want to be in. I think I'm not sure that I learned not to do that so much, but because I got into other difficult situations, but I've tried to get out of them, certainly. And so life lessons like that. I get gaining some maturity, taking responsibility. Like, well, if you do commit to something, I mean, then you've got to do it. So I don't know. Is this a life lesson? I don't know. I had an episode when I was at bowling. I was in charge of fundraising, say for United Way or whatever it was. I think it was United Way. And of course, they wanted to meet their goal. And our squadron commander, this colonel, what was his name? Can't remember it. I went in and I said, okay, here are the results so far. And we didn't have that great of results. And he said, well, I want a list of the names of the people who haven't contributed. And so I had already looked this up. And I said, well, I can't give you those. That's against the rules. And I cited this section. And he got really mad and just like basically kicked me out of his office. And I can't remember, there wasn't any follow-on on it. but it was really upsetting. And I don't know. I guess it was just like I was just trying to do the right thing. So, and I did that. And so I guess there's a life lesson in there.
Is there anything that you want me to know about your experiences I haven't asked? Any topics you want to talk about?
Oh, nothing comes to mind, offhand. So I think I expressed that, I didn't want to be doing this. I guess, you got to make decisions at the time. You're planted wherever you're planted, and then there you bloom. So one of those situations. So.
Well, then I'd like to thank you for your time helping us with our project, and thank you for your service to our country.
Okay, thank you.